Welcome to In the Thick of It, a podcast brought to you by Answering the Call. I'm David Fuller, the founder and director of Answering the Call. In the thick of it. You know, there's a lot of people who like to stay on the fringe. They tend to like keeping things safe. And then there are others who dive into what God is doing in the world and around them. Actually, they're ordinary people, but they're doing extraordinary things as they take the gospel to regions that are difficult to reach. Welcome to In the Thick of It. Join me in welcoming John Cotton Richmond. John's a good friend. We go way back. I'm not going to tell you all of our stories today, but I am going to tell you that, in fact, he and I took a trip to India back in the day. This trip was his first into the region, and from that trip, along with other things, a unique and productive career has emerged. You know, people get in the thick of it in different ways. There are those who are career and vocational missionaries, and there are those who bring the kingdom of God wherever they're placed. John works for the State Department. He is one of our country's ambassadors at large. His role is to fight human trafficking all over the world. He offers a very poignant and unique perspective on both the justice and the mercy of God. I think you're going to really enjoy John. So guys, let's welcome John Cotton Richmond. I've always known him as John Richmond. We go a long way back, John.
Indeed. It's good to be here with you.
Buddy, we really appreciate you making time to talk with us. And, you know, hopefully we can kind of discover and understand what the Lord's saying and what he's talking to us about justice. We want to talk about justice today. Is that all right?
Absolutely. I love it. I love the topic, and I love your heart.
Man, I remember, so I'm just kind of thinking back. First of all, what I remember is our first trip together. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was our only trip together. But
wow, that's true.
It is true. It's sad, right?
It is. I think we need to go somewhere.
Buddy, you tell me where. I'm on the plane.
Let's do it.
But I remember the first time we traveled, or when we traveled together, we went to India. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to kind of get us going here, what stands out in your mind about that trip to India?
Well, you know, it was the year 2000. Yeah. When we landed in India, it was just me and you, and our goal was just to learn the landscape. And as we got there, you talked to me about a passage in Matthew when Jesus sent out the 72, and one of the instructions was to find a man of peace.
That's
and when you find the man of peace, that's where you stay. And so you and I walked around New Delhi looking for a man of peace, and amazingly, we began to meet some people and found a few. And they began to share with us and unpack their ideas, their burden of how they wanted to care for other people.
That's so critical. I mean, that's kind of central to what we do, is to come into an area where maybe there's oppression from government, maybe there's oppression or even persecution from fundamentalist religious systems of one sort or another, and find that man of peace. What I have found, we saw it when we went to India. What I found is, like, it seems like no matter where you go, like God has his people there.
Yeah, there are people of goodwill in every country around the world. And as I get to travel now and see different parts of the world, it's clear to me, like within governments, within civil society organizations, within faith-based communities, there are always people of goodwill who want to do the right thing.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to refer to my notes because now you no longer are traipsing around me. You assumed a job of some responsibility.
Well, I thought I should move on.
We weren't paying very well.
I needed to find a new job. So
the kids got to eat, John.
Apparently, every day.
So now you are this says our ambassador at large to the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons in the United States.
I'm really grateful to get to serve in that role. Yeah. You know, I think when most people think about ambassadors, they think about an ambassador in residence. It's like an ambassador to another country, and they represent the U.S. government on every issue, but just to that one place. And then we have 6 ambassadors at large. So they represent the United States to the entire world, but on one specific issue. And I'm really grateful that Congress elevated the issue of trafficking in persons, of human trafficking, to that level to have a role of an ambassador. But I should say at this point that this conversation is just as friends. I'm speaking here in my personal capacity and not on behalf of the U.S. government.
We would understand that, but I appreciate you letting us know.
You bet.
All right, so but it didn't start there for you.
Mm-hmm.
We, you know, what I remember the old days, of course, and I remember coming back from India,
Mm-hmm.
and then you really beginning to feel a call of God in your life, and then you actually ended up going back to India.
Yep.
But let me ask you this, because I can even remember, you know, as you were going back, you were leaving kind of the corporate world and making some really tough decisions to kind of leave that and move you, and not only you, but your family, kids, wife, everybody to India for 3 years. Tell me about that process of that decision making and kind of coming out of that whole corporate scene.
You know, it was really a simple decision. I think coming back from India was honestly far more difficult than going to India. When we moved to India, and I'm so grateful for you and Joy for helping us through that process and that sort of discernment, but it was really this massive need in the world. There was so much injustice. There were so many people suffering. There was a new organization called International Justice Mission that was trying to start up in India, and they wanted a lawyer to go and do this work. And as Linda and I looked at the need of the world and we looked at the opportunities that we had, it just seemed like a really clear equation. We felt compelled to go, and I'm really glad we did.
Well, is that more of when you say that, is that more of an emotional decision or an intellectual one?
You know, I think it was both, perhaps,
Okay.
but in different ways at different times. I think there was an intellectual piece of just seeing the massive need in the developing world and the massive resources in the West, and realizing that at some point we're going to have to cross that bridge. At some point we're going to have to get those resources to the people who need help. But there was also an emotional piece of seeing the faces of need, of realizing that we want to have a life of meaning. And we thought, not that we had a burden for India or that there was something unique or special about us, but that God cared. And if we're to have his attitude, we need to start thinking in his rhythms, and we need to start taking on his desires. And if his desire is to go care for them, would it be possible for us to join?
Yeah, I think this you're talking about a piece here that I think that's really critical. Some people, hopefully some guys are watching this and wondering, you know, what is like God's call in my life? But that theocentric piece of that, it's not about our heart necessarily. It's about his heart. And our heart will come in line with that. But some of the driver behind that decision is not about my heart for India. It's about, no, this is God's heart for India, and I serve him.
Absolutely. I think we are to join God where he is already working. It is not about us.
Henry Blackaby.
Yeah, and the message that was made so clear to us as soon as we arrived in India was that this really isn't about us. The whole idea that kind of we think about it in the United States of we need to have a legacy. I think that's completely wrong. We don't need to have a legacy. We are Christ's legacy to the world.
Yeah.
And it's not about us. No one's going to remember us
that's a great distinction.
when we're gone.
That's a great distinction. What happened in India that kind of, you said that was like, okay, we thought this coming in, but then we learned as we get to India, it's not all about us.
No, I think that one of the things that truly drove that was when we moved to India, my wife was pregnant with our second child, and the delivery of that baby did not go well.
I remember.
It was pretty traumatic. The baby was fine, but my wife wasn't. And she lost a tremendous amount of blood. There was a lot of issues that fell. And to make a long story short, that evening, after all the blood transfusions were done, the doctors gathered with me, and they said she's probably not going to make it through the night.
Oh my, and yeah, okay.
And then they all just walked away. And I looked at her, and I realized I think they might be right. And so I walk out into this hospital hallway, smelling like a hospital hallway in India, a world away from everything that was familiar to me. And all the people who had told me going to India was going to be a disaster. Like, you're going to put your family at risk, you're losing your career, You don't know anything about slavery or how to rescue slaves, you know. And they told me, like, what they were saying is you have no credentials. You've got nothing to bring to the table. And what I realized is, you know, they were valuing expertise and experience. But as I figure it, you know, the builders of the Titanic were experts and had experience. The builder of the Ark had none, and he ended up okay. So I figure, like, let's go. But now I'm in this situation where everyone said it was going to be a disaster, and now it felt like their concerns were coming true. And I began to pray in that hallway. And my prayer started with really just frustration, because the energy and the adrenaline of the crisis had now given way to just fear and worry and anxiety. And I remember as I was praying, I was asking God, like, she deserves to live. Like, I have this cool job. I get to break down doors. I get to help people come into freedom. But she could be a mom and an educator anywhere. Like, she's so faithful. She's so kind. She deserves to live. And I felt just inside my heart, God so clearly communicate to me, no, she doesn't. She doesn't deserve to live. No one deserves anything. I give because I'm good. This is not about you. You do not get spiritual brownie points for quitting the law firm and moving to India. Like, I felt like what God was saying to me is, I am not a vending machine. You do not insert your token of obedience and take out your blessing of choice. I give because I'm God, and this is all about me and not about you. And I felt like there was a writing of my own mind in that. And understanding that if we were going to be successful on our journey to bring justice, it was going to require us to not be at the center of that narrative. And you know, fortunately, she did make it through the night, and she made it to the next week. She was very sick for a long time, but slowly began to get better. And as she got better, we began to meet victims of slavery, and we began to meet traffickers, and we began to hear their stories, and my kids began to grow, and we learned how to flourish within India. And honestly, it was a really formative experience for our family, but it definitely centers on this idea that this is all about God and not about us.
Yeah, so I've tried to understand a little bit, you know, the difference between, of course, now we'll hear a lot about social justice, and of course, I want social justice, but there's a social justice movement, and I wonder, how do you see it as the same or different from what we would understand as just biblical justice? Or maybe it's the same. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth either.
No, I mean, people are using different terms to express different ideas. But I think the idea of justice is central to Scripture. It talks about it throughout. And although my philosophy professor in college bent himself into an intellectual pretzel saying that you could not define justice, I think you can define it. I think it's a really simple and clear idea. And that is this: justice is simply making wrong things right. It's taking things that are wrong and working to make them right. Big things, little things, local things, global things. It's doing the right thing in the middle school lunchroom and going and sitting with that kid that has no one to sit with at lunch. It's picking up litter so that there's not debris in the garden. It's bringing order to things that are chaotic. All these things are making wrong things right, but it also extends to, how do we make sure that people's rights are protected? How do we make sure that the fact that God created people with inalienable rights, that he has gifted them and wants them to be free to make their own choices, if there's a perpetrator who is denying them that right, the justice means restraining that individual, making sure that people can flourish.
And making wrong things right in that sense.
Exactly.
And so you come back from India, you worked some with the Justice Department.
Yep, I spent 10 years as a federal prosecutor and got to be part of the Human Trafficking Prosecution unit that started up at the Department of Justice.
And from that, then you actually launched one of your own endeavors, which was?
The Human Trafficking Institute. I got to found that with a great friend. And we were just really working to make sure that we could support other governments in a way that an NGO can that a government can't. We can come alongside them for a longer term and really help them improve the delivery system of justice.
And from there to this appointment at the State Department.
You know, I didn't see this coming. But the chance to get to serve in the highest role the U.S. government has dedicated to human trafficking was a huge honor. Going through the Senate confirmation was a unique experience. But I can tell you my mom's really tickled that they unanimously confirmed me. She's like, the world can't agree on anything except my son.
Yeah, well, and I guess she's right. Now, so react to this statement for me.
Okay.
This comes from the head of the FBI's Human Trafficking.
Okay.
And it says, he says about you, quote, John is every trafficker's worst nightmare.
You know, he's a friend, I should say. You know, I certainly don't think I'm every trafficker's worst nightmare, but I do think that we need to make sure traffickers are having nightmares. Like, we need to make sure that the fear is something traffickers are experiencing and not just their victims. Because right now, all across the world, including right here in the United States, there are lots of victims who are afraid. And they have every reason to be afraid. They're afraid of their traffickers, they're afraid of abuse, they're afraid of physical harm, but they're also afraid of churches and communities of faith that might judge them or treat them harshly or not welcome them in. And they know when they're not welcome. They know the look that they get. Victims are afraid, but traffickers, they're not afraid. You know, the chance of a trafficker actually being held accountable is incredibly low. You're more likely to get struck by lightning than prosecuted for a human trafficking offense.
Statistically, that's the case.
It is, unfortunately. And we've actually seen a 40% decline in global prosecutions of traffickers over the last 5 years.
Okay, well, I dug up a couple numbers. And one number I dug up, though, was about arrests, trafficking arrests, since 2010. 2010, there were, in the U.S., there were 300 arrests. 2019, and really only up through the first part of December, 6,159 arrests. So that's suggesting a different pattern.
Well, we're getting better, right? We're putting more attention on this, and we should, because this is an important issue, and it's one that we can do something about. But the number of arrests compared to the number of victims being identified, when we look at the scope of the problem, you know, right now, the UN estimates that there's 24.9 million human trafficking victims in the world. Almost 25 million people. Now, just to put that into some sort of view, there were 12 million people trafficked during all 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade. So there are more people who are victims today than were victims during the entire 400 years of that transatlantic slave trade. More victims now than at any time in human history.
I mean, that's incredible to think about.
And there's something we can do about it, and I think it's time to get to it.
Okay, so there's this macro view, but let me distill that down into, let me ask you, like, for a person, you have, of course, interacted with traffickers, you have interacted with victims. Give me one success story.
Well, I think they're individual success stories, but they're also systemic success stories. On an individual story, I can tell you that there was a case that I worked in Chicago. There was a trafficker that exploited a number of women in both forced labor and sex trafficking. Because I think it might surprise people that most of the victims are forced labor victims, not sex trafficking victims.
Yeah, that would surprise me.
But he did both. He made them work and made them engage in commercial sex act, and he took all the profit. He was brutal in his schemes. He branded them with massive tattoos and threatened to cut them off their bodies if they ever ran away. He was incredibly harsh to them. There was one of his victims. She was from Eastern Europe, and she had learned a little bit of French and knew Russian. And she would write in her diary, and she would write in half Russian, half French, because she didn't want him to ever be able to read it. We found her diary when we executed the search warrants and discovered her. And at trial, she read a passage from her diary to the jury, and it was incredibly powerful. It said, "My God, where are you? Help me. I can't endure this anymore. Do I deserve to be treated like this? The way I'm being treated is nothing more than a slave. God, I need your justice. I need your help." And as she read that to the jury, there was not a dry eye.
Sure.
And the defendant, her trafficker, had to sit there quietly and listen to her. And after being told year after year to shut up and that your voice doesn't matter, it was now her voice was the only one that mattered in the courtroom. And he had to listen to that. It was an incredibly powerful moment and really a restorative moment, an opportunity for her to speak truth into that courtroom.
What is it? She's calling out for God. What have you learned about the kind of the nature of God, the character of God, as you've kind of walked through all this?
One is that God is an advocate. God is an advocate for his kids, and he wants to make those wrong things right. He wants to bring justice. But that he also loves deeply. And he doesn't just love the victims. He loves the traffickers. They're his kids too. He created them before the beginning of time and had hopes and dreams for them. And he's brokenhearted over the path that they've chosen. But he wants them to know that they're also not defined by their worst moments. That there is the possibility of redemption for the traffickers as well. So it's not a white hat, black hat thing. It's not good guys versus bad guys. It's a bunch of messed up folks who are all trying to work things out in this world, in this time, trying to bring this kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven.
You know, we've brushed across these issues in several countries, actually. For me, one place we've seen some of this is in the Eastern Congo.
Mm.
I don't know if you remember, but you and I had a conversation in Costa Rica years ago.
I do remember.
And I was trying to kind of sort out all that I had seen, and I was understanding it's not white hat, black hat, it's people.
Yeah.
By the way, so am I. And just trying to really sort that out. We had some great conversations around that. The follow-up to that conversation for me was when I went back to Congo, some of the women who we had heard and recorded their stories, that kind of thing. Some of them stood in it was in a church service, and they stood to give testimony. And to be honest, I didn't want to be there. I'm there, and these women are sharing and I'm just I'm almost trying to hide. But those faces, and I know they were the same women we talked to before, because those faces are etched in your mind. And I guess 2 or 3 of them stood and began to talk about their experience of coming into a relationship with God, coming into a relationship with Him through Jesus. They're coming into this relationship with Him. And one lady, and I remember her story, and it was horrific. One lady said, if I could go back, I wouldn't change that thing. Because of what's come out of this for me.
Wow.
In this relationship I have. My takeaway from that was, man, what happened to her was so bad. It was so tragic. But it's this simple concept, and I know it's simple, but it's kind of profound, man. It's a simple concept of, God is good. He's so good that He can take these horrific situations, or bad in my life as well, but in there, this is horrific situation.
Yeah.
And even out of that, bring good. And it's through the years, that has really helped me. That conversation with you, and then the follow-up to that's really helped me catch and understand what we're involved in it is theocentric, and it's about Him, and His goodness sustains it all.
Yeah, that's really powerful. That was an amazing moment.
It was an amazing moment.
When I was recently talking to a group of students, and one of them raised this question, like how do you explain about all this evil in the world? And as I was listening to her, I was realizing that's really the wrong question. It's not hard for me to understand why there's evil in the world. The question is, why is there good in the world? Why is there any good in the world? And the answer is because God is good. And He wants us to expand and bring that goodness, to bring that light into dark places.
And that's bringing justice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's what Micah said, right? What is required of us? It's to seek justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. And when we're doing those 3 things, I think we're on the right path.
So if you kind of stand back and go, what would you say today to the church?
I would say that communities of faith should lean into the issues of the day. That we do not need a bubble-wrapped Christianity keeping us safe from the world. What we need are people of faith going into places. It could be into businesses, art, media, into justice, into law enforcement, to be engaged, to understand, to wrestle with the issues of the world, to wrestle with doubts, to wrestle with arguments on the other side, but to be engaged. When I look at the scriptures and I see the pattern of Jesus and the disciples, it was never retreating. It was always advancing. It was always being with people, being available. Just the ministry of availability, making yourself available to others, can be incredibly powerful. But then I think once we're available, once we're engaging, to do it in love. I think to be happy, to express some of the joy that we get, that we're not upset with people. I think that the Christians often feel like overbearing nannies to the world instead of joyful ambassadors for who God has called us to be. And so I think we can be joyful in it. And I think we can talk honestly about tough topics. We know that there's a lot of people that are coming to churches that are part of communities of faith that have suffered abuse. And I think we need to talk about that. I think we need to be honest about the fact that there, in any given Sunday morning, sitting in the pews are probably some folks who are dealing with trauma, maybe some folks who've perpetrated trauma, and probably some folks that have purchased commercial sex that week. And at some point, could we have an honest conversation about those issues?
That's a challenge. That's a challenge. You said, you mentioned never retreating. John Cotton, I've known you a lot of years. I've never known you to retreat.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't want to retreat, but that doesn't mean not having rest, not having Sabbath. Like, I think there is a time to be still and wait on the Lord. But I do think that if we are going to be agents of change, if we're going to be salt and light in the world, we need to get out there. We need to be on the field.
Well, I just have to say, I appreciate you not retreating. You've always been one of my heroes, buddy. And I appreciate you not retreating.
Well, I am so grateful for your friendship and for your wise counsel over the years. It's made a big difference in my life.
I don't know how wise. We've had some fun.
We've definitely had some laughs. There's no doubt about that.
Guys, I'm just going to ask you if you would, we're hearing from John today, but this topic he's bringing about us not retreating, us really being, as the church, us being engaged, us understanding that we have the solution, us knowing that this is theocentric. It's about God's heart and us coming into alignment with that and being involved where he's involved. I'm asking you to, we want you to pray about that and see what the Lord might say to you in that, and pray for John and pray for those guys up here who are really actively pursuing and seeking justice for some of the world's, some of the least of these, really. So, John, I'm hoping people will pray for you. I know I will.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Bless you, buddy. All right, now we're moving to our rapid-fire questions, John.
Okay.
The lightning round.
I'm ready.
We ask these same 3 questions to everyone we talk to.
Wow.
We get a variety of answers.
I bet you do.
And I'm really curious to know what your answers are to these questions.
I'm really curious to know what the questions are.
All right, you ready?
All right.
If you could put anything on a billboard and proclaim it to the world, what would it say?
You are loved.
I like it. Here's one I'm really curious to see what you think. When you think of success, who is the first person that comes to your mind and why?
My bride.
Why?
I think because any success I've had is probably because of her. And loving her and raising our family and the work that we do together is probably going to ultimately be the greatest success that I'll ever have.
There's a reason we understand her and know her as the lovely and talented.
She is both lovely and talented.
Third question.
All right.
What is, like, for you, if you could kind of summarize a life-changing book, one that you would recommend to people or that you'd give someone, a life-changing book?
The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah,
what about it?
It's beautiful. Well, first of all, it's accessible to everybody. It's short.
Yeah.
It's a giant parable about people who are in Greytown or people who are in hell who take a bus ride to heaven.
Right.
And they're on the edge of heaven, on the boundary of heaven, and they're trying to decide if they're going to go in. And all of them basically decide, except for one, not to go into heaven and to return to Greytown, to return to hell. And the analysis and watching each of them make those choices is unbelievable. And I think it just opens up so many of the challenges that we all have about what makes it difficult to like God back. Like, why are we so hesitant to embrace who he is?
As we were saying earlier, not everybody likes him back.
Yeah, and it also highlights a principle that Lewis talks about in Mere Christianity, that the door to hell is locked from the inside.
Yeah, I think that book's fascinating. For me, it was like this, as they would come in, it was as if the temporal nature of their understanding and experience, they couldn't accommodate the eternal. It wasn't that the eternal wasn't available to them.
Right.
It was that they couldn't accommodate it. or
Yeah.
wouldn't. Maybe the better thing, it wouldn't accommodate it.
Mm-hmm.
And that concept for me was like kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. I think most people would really enjoy it.
Okay, last question. This one's easy. If people want to kind of follow what you're doing, how do they best do that?
Personally, I'm on social media. People are welcome to follow me there at John Richmond 1. But most of all, just send an email or drop a line. Happy to try and be available to folks as they're wrestling with these issues.
It's what ambassadors do.
Absolutely. And we're all ambassadors.
Indeed. And guys, we welcome you as well to follow us at answeringthecall.org. And we'd love to see you go to that website, kind of check out what we're doing. And if you wanted to, as you get there, you can sign up to receive our regular email that comes out. So we would certainly invite you to do that. Again, thanks for being with us, brother.
Thank you, Dave.
Bless you, man.
Thank you for joining us today in the thick of it. Great guest today. I hope that God put something in you today that you can apply and keep with you for a long time. Let me personally thank those of you who continue to pray and who continue to give to the work of answering the call in our world's most difficult places as we continue to stay in the thick of it. We invite you to visit us at answeringthecall.org and follow us on Instagram at ATC Missions. We are also on Facebook under Answering the Call. Finally, you can email us at info@answeringthecall.org. Send us any questions you have about today's podcast and any questions you might have about answering the call. We would love to get those and be able to respond. And for those of you who do that, we will draw from that pool of names, and for the winner, we will send you the book our guest mentioned today, the book that was influential in their lives. That will be our gift to you. We look forward to being with you again next month in the thick of it. God bless you. Be well as you stay in the thick of it.